Brian, Director of Marketing at Redline Solutions. Our webinar today is the first in our Traceability for Dummies webinar series titled The New Era of Traceability from Compliance to Profit. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website so you can share it with others in your organization who were unable to attend. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the questions window on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being brought to you by Carlisle Technology, producer of Food Traceability for Dummies, and Redline Solutions, producer of Produce Traceability for Dummies. Both books are available to you for free, and we'll show you how you can get these valuable resources at the end of the presentation. And we'd also like to thank our sponsor, Zebra Technology. On our agenda today, we'll start out with why traceability really matters in the produce and protein industry, what exactly traceability is, why you need it. We'll give you an overview of Canada's regulatory environment, as well as the regulatory requirements in the U.S. And we'll take a look at the latest retailers requiring traceability, the importance of a traceability solution, and hear some success stories on traceability implementation. We'll show you how Redline Solutions and Carlisle Technology can help you get prepared to implement traceability. And we'll wrap up with questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Our speakers today are Wayne Slater, Director of Sales and Marketing at Carlisle Technology and author of Food Traceability for Dummies. Adam Meyer, Food Industry Coordinator for the Government of Ontario. Ed Tracy, Vice President of Supply Chain Efficiencies for the Produce Marketing Association. And Todd Baggett, CEO of Redline Solutions and author of Produce Traceability for Dummies. So here's our first speaker, Todd Baggett, to start us out. Over to you, Todd.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. And I would just like to mention to everybody that we do have the capability, if you have any questions that come up today, there's a question window you can type that your questions in at. Those will queue up for the Q&A session at the end. So with that, why traceability matters? You know, traceability matters to consumers. It matters to the grower-shippers, the processors, and the retailers. In short, it's a critical element to the entire food ecosystem. If we look at some of the foodborne illnesses here, what we can see is that the CDC reports that in the U.S., 1 in 6 Americans, approximately 48 million of us, will get sick each year due to some type of food poisoning. 128,000 require hospitalization and 3,000 will die. This matters because we're talking about people who are getting sick, and these people could be your father, your brother, your best friend, your daughter, etc. The most common case for foodborne illness is salmonella. And what we see is approximately 22% of the foodborne illnesses are associated with produce, and another 22% are associated with poultry, beef, and pork. Now, if we break this down a little bit further, looking at the produce side of things, again, we've got that roughly 22% of all foodborne illnesses associated with produce. We see that really a majority of those are associated with improper handling after leaving the field, and that the 6% that are associated with the on-farm processes such as growing, packing, and shipping really lead us to about 2.9 million people per year. And that's why we're here, and that's why traceability is so important. Now, if we look at U.S. consumption on the produce side, it's approximately 350 pounds per year per person. In 2006, there was an E. coli outbreak in spinach that was really the 9/11 of food safety on the produce side. 71% of the people stopped buying spinach altogether, and 16% at that time stopped buying lettuce. here we are 9 years later, and spinach consumption has still not reached the levels that it was at back in 2006. Some of the other notable recalls that we've seen include the salmonella that was originally associated with tomatoes, later found out to be peppers in 2008. In 2009, there was the salmonella in peanut butter, where we had 388 people who were infected in 42 different states. In 2011, we had a horrendous event in Europe where there was E. coli found in sprouts coming out of Germany that resulted in over 3,700 illnesses and 45 deaths. And the tragic loss in the U.S. in 2011 where we had listeria contamination in cantaloupe that caused 33 deaths and almost 150 illnesses. We also are seeing that there's a current active recall right now for apples coming out of California, where approximately 32 illnesses have been identified in 11 states and tied to 7 deaths. So the question is not, will this happen again? It's more, when will this happen again, and in what commodity? So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Wayne Slater. And Wayne, can you take us through some of the reasons for recalled foods?
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd. Those are some interesting stats you just put out there. And hello, everyone. Every year, the FDA compiles information about what they call reportable foods, otherwise known as recalled foods, and release it in an annual reportable food register report. The report tabulates the major reasons why some foods were hazardous to health. It also lists the types of foods that were most likely to be hazardous. In some instances, the report makes comparisons with the results from prior years. So some interesting stats were derived from the 2012 report, which seems to be the most current one that we could get our hands on. And the first one is actually, increasingly, there are a number of recalls being initiated due to mislabeling. This catch-all phrase encompasses products that contain undeclared allergens or ingredients missing from the label. Undeclared allergens were the primary recall hazard for the fiscal year 2012. They accounted for 85 of the 224 reportable reports. That's a whopping 37.9%. Coming in second was our good old friend salmonella with 63 reports, and topping out about 28% there. And third was contamination with listeria, with 48 reports and 21%. Another bacteria contaminant, which actually was much lower this year, was the well-known E. coli, coming in at 1.8%. But overall, undeclared allergens, labeling, and microbial contamination were responsible for almost 90% of all of the reports. Notably, the total number of recalled foods this year, or that particular year, was a tiny, tiny number when compared with the overall total batches of food produced. So getting a little more specific to meat, today's meat packing and processing industry is quite a different beast than its predecessor was 30 to 40 years ago. It's amazing to think that with the ever-increasing population growth and globalization more or less enabling meat processors to sell to a growing number of markets, that there actually are fewer plants today. The meat industry has become a low-margin, high-volume game for the most part. Most companies are turning to value-added further processing to differentiate their products, increase their profits. But today in North America, we are living in the era of what we like to call the mega meat plant. Today's plants are typically much higher in volume output, have much more efficiency when it comes to their production. They really need this efficiency to remain competitive in the marketplace. And they're typically early adopters to employ technology wherever they can to streamline processes and reduce business risk. One of the most significant business risks to any meat company, though, is a large-scale recall, especially given the magnitude of the production they're doing today. They can be really, really expensive in this new era of high-volume production. So speaking of costly recalls, here's just a couple of examples here. In 2008, some of you may recall the West Highland Hallmark Meat Packing Company. They were the subject of the largest meat recall in U.S. history. The recall came in the wake of animal cruelty and violations of that particular law in California, that California-based slaughtering plant. an investigation conducted by the Humane Society of the United States, more or less, or that was the result of that investigation. At the request of the FDA, Westland Hallmark recalled more than 143 million pounds of beef. The initial costs of the recall were estimated to exceed 116 million. In November of 2012, they also had to reach a $500 million settlement with numerous plaintiffs, including the federal government. However, that assessment will forever go unpaid because they basically went bankrupt at the end of that. More local to us was a very well-known recall fairly recently in 2012 of XL Foods. XL Foods is a Canadian meat packing company located in Alberta. The company sold beef throughout the United States and Canada. At between 2,000 and 5,000 cattle per day, XL Foods handled approximately 1/3 of all Canadian beef production. That's quite a bit. In 2012, XL Foods was temporarily closed due to an E. coli outbreak. American and Canadian regulators determined that the testing procedures that were used in the plant were totally inadequate to protect consumers. The E. coli contamination at XL Foods resulted in 18 confirmed cases of E. coli infections, as well as the recall of food products in both countries. The U.S. blocked beef imports from the plant, and 2,200 workers at the plant were sent home when Canadian officials closed the plant. The Canadian Cattlemen's Association estimated that was the largest meat recall in Canadian history and had an economic impact that cost the industry approximately $27 million. Today, the XL Food plant has been recently reopened under the watchful eye of a new owner, a Brazilian-based meatpacking giant with a much tighter risk management culture. But people aren't the only ones at risk. Even pet food is not immune from some of the most costly recalls. Back in 2007, Menu Foods, once the largest producer of pet foods in North America, was held liable for the distribution of the product tainted with a lethal cocktail of reactive chemicals. The Animal Health Laboratory at the University of Guelph in Ontario identified the contaminants in some of the recalled products included key chemicals that were used in rat poison, melamine, which is a plastic precursor that may also be used as fertilizer, and cyanuric acid, which is commonly used to stabilize chlorine in swimming pools. Now, alone, these isolated doses of these chemicals does not cause any issues in pets. But however, when they're actually mixed together, an insoluble crystal is formed that can rapidly obstruct the kidneys and cause kidney failure. The incident has been labeled as one of the most and largest consumer product recalls in North American history. The recall involved over 60 million units of pet food at a cost of $42 million. And of course, there was litigation paid out to the tune of about $24 million. So after their share prices plummeted, the company was actually bought out for a pretty inexpensive price. There are many more examples of expensive recalls in the industry, but I'm pretty sure you get the picture. But before we get too deep into this, let me turn you back over to Todd to get you into more about traceability.
Very good. Thank you, Wayne. So let's look at what traceability is. Really, if we think about it, traceability is not new. In fact, many of the growers and processors have had great internal traceability systems. The challenge, though, has been when the product moves into the supply chain, that visibility has gotten fuzzy, and that has caused us problems. So first of all, if we look at this, the gold standard has been one step forward and one step back. And in the U.S., that's not just a great idea. It's been the law since the Bioterrorism Act of 2002. In addition to looking at who you shipped your product to and what the source materials were for the products that you shipped, you also need to look at process traceability. And process traceability is really knowing about what happened within your own organization. And that includes where the product went, what processes it went through, and any other variables that were introduced at that point. So really what we're looking at in traceability is starting at the beginning, or the source, tracking the movement of the product through its various stages of production, handling, and transportation, all the way to its end destination, which is typically going to be a retailer or a food service or restaurant that is actually serving the product. So let's talk for a minute about what are the benefits of traceability. There's no question that traceability systems require an investment of time, talent, and money, but there has to be some benefit that you get out of it. And one of those is simply looking at it enables the electronic records, and by having those electronic records, it allows the FDA and the Canadian government and the CDC to more quickly go through their investigation to identify the potential sources and isolate those. The idea is, again, to isolate that product to minimize the impact of the implicated product in the market and to pull that tainted product out much faster. And by doing this, we're able to minimize the consumer illnesses and deaths and protect our brands. It also gives us an ability to clear our product, which may be guilty by association. And we've seen this in the U.S. in some of the large-scale recalls that I mentioned on a prior slide. When there was a problem in spinach, you could not buy spinach in the U.S. All spinach was pulled from the shelves. It was not available in restaurants because no one knew what the source was, and we wanted to make sure that the consumers were protected. We had a similar type event back in 2008 with the tomatoes that were originally implicated in the salmonella poisoning that was going on, and what we found out later was it was actually the Sarmiento peppers. Again, this guilt by association is something that we've had to deal with consistently. But the idea is by minimizing the implicated lots, we're able to put the good product back into commerce faster and keep the commodity or the food product itself in high esteem with the consumers. And really what that does is it protects your company, it protects your commodity, and it protects the industry. At the end of the day, our goal is to improve our relationships with the customers, and we do that by taking care of them and protecting them. So let's talk a little bit about streamlining traceability. Traceability is something that is very difficult to do without automation. And the reason that I say that is that if we look at a lot of the small to medium-sized food processors and produce companies across North America, we find that they're typically using manual paper-based systems for their records. And while these may be efficient for them, the challenge is they do not lend themselves to expeditious fact-finding when there is a problem. So if it's something that we're looking at here, we really need to do 4 things, and that is to identify the items as they come in. We need to know the items that we're dealing with. We need to capture that information about the sources, their movement throughout the plant, and also associate them back to the finished goods that we're going to ship. So if we look at the pieces to this that we need are actually starting out with a barcode labeling. Now, I don't want to say you can only do barcoding. RFID technology is another technology that is well suited for this, but often not used, particularly in small to medium businesses due to the size of the cost. But if you can identify the product as it first comes in by labeling it, and then as it moves through different processes, capture that information and transfer that information to a server, typically via some type of a Wi-Fi or network within the facility to keep your costs down, what you're able to do is to bring this information together. The other things that you see here are scales, which can be critical in knowing specific things about lots, quantities that you're dealing with of not only the product itself, but in processing environments, the other ingredients that are being mixed in with the product. At the end of the day, what Redline and Carlisle do is to bring all of this information together, store it for you in a server and a database so that when there is an issue that you can quickly identify it, isolate the problem that has occurred, and minimize the impact on the consumer and the rest of the supply chain. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Wayne.
All right, thanks, Todd. So yeah, so we're doing a lot of talk about traceability, but why is it so important? Like, there's so many added benefits that come with a traceability solution, especially an automated one. And one of them is just the ability for it to affect your bottom line. So when implemented properly, traceability can be a key enabler to improving your revenues and your profits. Many small processors have told me they've been able to leverage their traceability systems to actually sign larger, more stringent and sophisticated retailers like Costco and Walmart simply by being able to meet their tight recall processes and timelines. I think Costco now requires its food suppliers to perform, I think it's 2 traceability exercises a year. The recall exercise is conducted on a product chosen at random, so you really don't have any say into what product they choose. And then your traceability system must be able to account for 100% of the recalled product in a very small window. That window now is 2 hours, so you basically have 2 hours to be able to account for 100% of your recalled product. That is a pretty tight timeline for any paper-based process, which highlights what Todd was talking about earlier, where you really need we can't almost emphasize enough the importance of looking at automation. Traceability systems also collect a lot of data. Much of that information on production and packaging. If you like playing with reports or playing with numbers, you can start looking at data trends, like why certain production lines may outperform others, or what certain shifts are more efficient, or maybe even get a better handle on inventory management, on what's received, what's in stock, picked but not shipped in real-time inventory reports. You know what you have and what it's worth at any given time. It's almost, you basically have real-time access into what's going on. This control actually helps you isolate and control things such as theft. Almost every food plant I've been into actually has a theft issue. And you have insight into production numbers, created versus shipped. Again, shift, who was on and who was associated to those particular shifts. So you actually have a lot of control now and a lot of insight into things that are going on in your plant floor. Yeah, just to share a bit of a story, one customer was recently telling me he has literally grown his business in almost every way on the back of his traceability system. He really bought the traceability system to be compliant with his regulatory bodies and a couple of supply chain vendors that he had. But he said only after a couple of years of implementing his system, he was selling to retailers he never dreamed he'd be working with. He had actually increased his product output, hired more employees, and is overall a lot more profitable than ever. And he said he was doing that on the back of his traceability system. And that's the type of information we like to hear. When you really think of the real reason he got into it was just really for regulatory compliance. And then when a traceability system is actually implemented properly, of course it's a critical enabler for any food protection plan, helping you build safety in from the start and enabling you to quickly and accurately respond. Now, this speed and agility improves consumer protections as well as minimizing the potential financial impact of a recall for both yourself and your supply chain partners. And as you've seen earlier, we don't need to go back into it. Some recalls can be incredibly expensive. Many traceability solutions can capture safety information like HACCP data for truck inspection upon receiving items like cleanliness, temperatures, and many more points. One interesting side benefit of a good traceability system is its ability to help protect your brand. Not many I've spoken to think about this until after they've had an incident. But as a business owner, you spend many years working on the branding of both your corporation and its products. Many of you have well-respected brands out in the marketplace these days, and with the internet and social media enabling real-time news everywhere, all it takes is one poorly handled recall to throw away years of really hard work on your brand. Probably just to throw an example out there, many of us have never returned to a Jack in the Box since their big E. coli outbreak in '93. I think that affected over 700 people and I think killed in the range of about 4. I remember the irony of that outbreak because it was tied to the unique name of the infected product. The infected product was actually called the Monster Burger, and the slogan they used for that Monster Burger was, "It's so good, it's scary." It's kind of funny, but I guess not really that funny for those who ate the Monster Burger. But those traceability also helps you comply with, of course, your ever-increasing state, provincial, and federal requirements on food safety. And actually, speaking of regulatory requirements, I'd like to introduce a well-respected individual from Agriculture Canada. He also possesses one of the longest job titles I've ever seen to date. From the Food Safety and Traceability Programs branch of the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, I'd like to pass you over now to Adam Meyer. Hey, Adam.
Thanks, Wayne. A small correction there, from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food with the Government of Ontario, so not the national level. So thanks, Wayne, and I really want to thank the organizers for the opportunity to share with you today a government perspective on traceability. So in my role as Food Industry Traceability Coordinator in Ontario, I'm sort of in a unique position because at the sub-national level of government, sort of equivalent to a state government, in most cases, we do not actually create the regulations related to traceability. Rather, we have the privilege of working with great businesses in our jurisdiction to really support business growth, market expansion, and overall competitiveness of processors in Ontario. So it might surprise you, I actually don't like talking about traceability all that much at all. I much prefer talking about the outcomes of traceability systems, effective traceability systems. In government, we tend to think about the great things that traceability enables for business and also society as a whole, often termed as public benefits. And you know, when we look at the outcomes of implementing traceability systems, there certainly is a spectrum, and benefit accrues to business, as our previous speakers have talked much about, and there also is a lot of the public safety benefits that Wayne has taken the time to detail. And it's neat to see those different outcomes enabled by traceability overlaid with one another. And you'll see that when we talk about government priorities, there's a lot of overlap. When it comes to, we realize that a lot of this is driven by the end consumer. Consumers want improved information and visibility of what's on the dinner table. And they also want to keep their grocery bill as low as possible. And nothing's new there. For the processors that are on the call today, within your business, you want to be in compliance out of the gate. Food safety is a pre-competitive requirement. We all know that. But you want to minimize risk to your brand, and you want to sell more than you did last year. That's pretty much what it boils down to. And you want to be here for the next generation of workers in your operation. So our government priorities, actually, when we look at where all these things come together, are not all that different. And I don't know if that's surprising or not to you, but we want businesses in our jurisdiction to produce safe food, and we want them to be competitive and grow. And we want them to be in compliance with regulation, but also recognize that a lot of the regulations aren't created by government. A lot of those regulations are actually created by the market, and the market is leading a lot of the requirements that actually exist. Sustainability is important from a government perspective, and traceability can actually be a tool to articulate and be able to capture data related to traceability, related to sustainability, and be able to communicate that to the marketplace. We want the public to be safe, and we want to have a visible food supply chain to help the public make great choices about food. And local food is a priority in Ontario, and I know that's a priority in many jurisdictions, and traceability falls into that piece of the equation as well. Above all else, being able to effectively respond to incidents of in emergency situations is very important. Effective food recall is a large priority of our government as well. In our jurisdiction in Canada, most traceability requirements are dictated by private standards, as mentioned, whether embedded in a food safety scheme, like a GFSI food safety scheme, or requirements of your downstream buyer. Regulations for processors in our jurisdiction here include the ability of our Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Health Canada to issue food recalls. I'll talk in a moment about the Safe Foods for Canadians Act, which is still under development. But much of the existing traceability-specific regulation to date is focused on the livestock sector. I'm not going to get into too much detail on that today, but I am going to talk for a few moments about a subject of interest, future traceability regulations that are coming to Canada. The takeaway for you should be two things. Regulatory oversight and requirements are going to be increasing. We know that that's happening, and certainly not decreasing. And two, it will be the responsibility of business to evolve and to comply with such requirements. Those should be two key takeaways from what I'm about to share with you. Now, these slides are for discussion purposes only, and folks on the call today should refer to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's website for the most up-to-date information, as these are proposed regulations, and I'm not from the level of government that is creating these. So do note the web URL on the bottom of the following slides. The proposed Safe Foods for Canadians Act, similar to regulation that's occurring south of the border, has a centerpiece priority on improved safety, consumer protection, which is supported and strengthened by food traceability. So food traceability is really viewed as an enabling backbone of this new proposed regulation from what we see today. The regulations are going to be phased in over time and include a licensing component, which is not entirely new, but new products are going to be licensed and will also require a preventative control plan component to demonstrate compliance with requirements. And this will be consistent with HACCP. As it relates to traceability, the license component is most relevant here, and it requires traceability and will be necessary for any processor that trades interprovincially or internationally. It also applies to importers and of food and food ingredients. So quite a good section of the supply chain and the food system that will be impacted by these proposed regulations. As far as requirements go, this is what's been proposed so far with regards to traceability. Records must be maintained for a number of years. Those records must support the one-up, one-down traceability regime that was discussed earlier on the call. And those records need to be produced upon request in the event of a recall, with a focus on that data being readily available and also in a form and format that can be understood easily by the regulator. What we're also seeing today is proposed regulations that will also put requirements on the carriers and transporters of food products. So, you know, there's obviously a pressure to be able to effectively articulate the above requirements that I've just discussed to even the carriers that move goods. And again, this puts the onus on the processor to be able to be a good communicator. And that speaks to the comments earlier about automation. So here at the province of Ontario, at a subnational level of government, we're in a pretty neat role. We encourage business to make informed decisions. We want to enhance the adoption of traceability systems for the broader purpose of economic development, help the businesses that are here succeed, be successful. We do contribute to the policy development process, and we do maintain a national registry or provincial registry that supports national traceability initiatives. The coolest part, though, is we actually develop a bunch of neat tools and resources to really articulate to businesses why traceability is a great way to be here, continue to exist here, and to continue to grow and be successful. So when we engage businesses, we often classify them on a bit of a continuum, if you will, a bit of a spectrum. And it relates to traceability investment. So you might be new, those folks on the call today, you may be new to the whole idea of traceability and automation, or you may be very experienced and have a track record of investment within your operation. We also recognize that traceability system implementation affects processes within your business, and it also impacts people. The people that do the good work, help your business transform ingredients into saleable product. But there's a lot of behavioral change that has to happen, and training and skills development when any system is implemented. And of course, there's a technology piece. There's often hardware and software that needs to couple with processes and people to be effective. I don't want the text on the screen to overwhelm you, but the point here is this. Regardless of your traceability investment so far, there's likely next steps that you can take today to invest in those people, the processes, and technology to have measurable impacts on efficiency, risk mitigation, and really to deliver a return on investment to your business that really aligns with your broader business goals and objectives. The idea is that if you move along this spectrum, you'll realize that improved return on investment and also business risk is mitigated as you proceed. So there's a web URL up there, and this will be of interest to those that are in the Ontario jurisdiction, but also possibly to those that are outside across North America. We've got a neat website with a bunch of tools and resources. I work with a great team here in Ontario, staff who work to create traceability resources that really sort of speak to businesses who are seeking great information to help make informed decisions. Our website is a place where we often direct processors who are looking just to learn more on how to get started. So there's a number of really fantastic case studies that I'm really excited about that are on this website. Neat new videos and text-based PDF business case that really speak to articulate the business case around traceability. So do log in there and make use of resources. I'll also mention that we're collaborating with the Institute of Food Technology in the United States on educational tools and resource development. We're trying to harmonize a suite of best practices around traceability. So there's some good collaboration that has gone into the resources that are free for you to use there today. I will talk briefly about a funding program we have in our jurisdiction, and it's rather unique, and I know it's obviously only available to those that are in Ontario, but the reason I'm bringing this up today is that we have a cost-shared funding program here in Ontario that's supported by the Canadian government as well that really focuses on the importance of having a plan or an assessment to guide and target your hard-earned investment dollars to the best possible projects that will move your business forward. So we really believe that it's important to have a good plan and a roadmap to help you guide investment, and really we want to support those sorts of traceability projects that look beyond just automating the paper process, but really to look to build systems that help you work along the supply chain with your food system partners. A couple of neat things just to direct those that are in the Ontario jurisdiction. There's some workshops that I want to make you aware of. There's a web URL if you're interested in learning more about traceability. And for anyone, there's some great online self-assessment tools that we've created in Ontario. And this would be useful for anyone across North America who's in the food processing, manufacturing business to get a bit of a snapshot of where you're at and where you might focus on to move your business forward. So do take advantage of those resources. Just in summary here, I just want to drive the point home that what really matters most is your traceability drivers and those drivers that will move your business forward. What are you actually trying to accomplish here? And I'm pretty confident in saying that you are going to need to be able to articulate a business case to your management team or your controller, or if you are that person on the line, you want to feel confident in the steps forward and know why you're investing in traceability systems. Know the people on your team and engage them early, and start to think about the next steps forward. So keep a focus on your business goals and desired outcomes, and I'm confident that you'll be talking about the success of your business through traceability as an enabler on your road ahead. So hopefully that was helpful, and I think it's great on this panel here today that I get the chance to now pass it over to Ed Tracy. Ed is the VP of Supply Chain Efficiency within the Produce Marketing Association. Ed's rather well positioned to make this transition. He's a dual U.S.-Canadian citizen, and he's a perfect person to give the North American perspective on FSMA and the Produce Traceability Initiative. So without further ado, over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Adam. That was very, very informative. As Adam said, I'm going to talk about where the regulators are on this side of the border with PTI, or with FSMA and PTI. There we go. Currently, there's 7 proposed rules that have been released out of FSMA by FDA. The rules have been released for comment. Comment periods have all closed on the rules, and now the FDA is bearing down and creating the final rules, which are anticipated to be, most of them should be released towards about the middle of this year. The preventative controls for human foods, foreign supplier verification programs, sanitary transportation, the produce rule, which actually went twice. They resubmitted a portion of that rule once they got the initial feedback. Third-party accreditation and mitigation strategies to protect food, and then control for animal foods. So the FDA has been quite busy. The traceability regulation, which will be incorporated into the regulation called record keeping. The pilots were completed by the Institute of Food Technologists under contract to the FDA in August 2012, and the report was written. The FDA's next step is to report back to Congress on the findings of that pilot, and that document has been completed. It's just waiting for final approval, and now that those other rules are out, the comment period is over, that should be moving forward next. Those other rules were subject to a lawsuit. The record keeping is not, but since they've already done all the heavy lifting on the rules that were subject to the lawsuit, we're now expecting the record keeping regulation to be coming out fairly soon. PTI compliance will exceed the regulations that are coming in the record keeping regulation. We worked very closely with FDA, Mike Taylor and his staff, and I am the liaison between PTI and FDA, and we work quite closely with them. And their position is, and our position is, align it in support of PTI, but we don't want the government to tell us how to run our business. Let the industry figure that piece out, but make sure the regulations are at a high enough level and aligned with what we're doing with PTI. And as a result of the relationship we actually have FDA participating on a task force that's developing a best practice on sharing traceback data in the event of a recall. PTI we've created around 26 best practices and guidance documents, and this is one that FDA is quite interested in. And as was said in the last presentation, to get the data back so they can put it into their systems so they can conduct a traceback investigation to identify the cause of the contamination or the foodborne illness in order to identify and pull that product from market as quickly as possible. A quick update on what retailers are requesting PTI compliance. Publix were pretty well the first one out there, and they have not wavered on that. Stater Brothers out of California. I know Aldi out of their Ohio division requested it. They are now doing their programming on their systems in Germany. Then they will be rolling it out to all their divisions. Food Line, it's required for their North Carolina Salisbury operation. Again, they're working on doing their system implementation, and we'll be rolling it out across United Supermarkets. And the one that really probably moved the industry the most was Walmart. They require PTI labeling, and they came out with a very specific label for the RPC, the returnable plastic container or the plastic box. And I'll show an example of that in a slide or two. And then Whole Foods most recently, they've come out with a PTI labeling requirement with an advanced ship notice to a designated portal. And they've actually got quite creative with how they're using the PTI label. It's part of a larger initiative where it's part of the rating system for the product they're putting on the shelf, and they're using the PTI label to look up at the store when the merchant is putting the product onto the shelf. He's scanning the label. It is then looking up their system and pulling the current rating of that supplier. Are they good, better, or best? And they're putting up sign at point of sale to indicate that. So it's quite creative, but the underpinning of the whole thing is having a produce traceability label, a PTI label, that's scannable so they can so they can do that. Right now I'm going to turn back to Maureen. She's going to take us through our first polling question.
Right, thanks, Ed. So folks, we're just wondering if you could take a quick second actually, and respond to this question. We're wondering, do you currently have customers requiring traceability labeling? And if you don't mind just answering yes or no, we'll go ahead and show some results. Thanks, folks. I see you're answering. This is great. Good. Okay, we'll let this go. It sounds like it's looking for sure like the majority of you definitely have customers requiring traceability. So, okay, good. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It was about 75% to 25%. 75% yes. So thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go back to you, Ed. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. And that's consistent with what we're hearing in the industry. Our estimation is we're over halfway with the number of cases that are in supply chain that are currently labeled. On the food service side, there are a number of operators who've requested PTI compliance. My focus is produce because that's the industry I work in. But a number of these operators and distributors are requiring any traceability or any industry initiative, where there is an industry initiative, they expect their suppliers to be compliant with that. And there are initiatives currently underway in the meat and poultry area, as well as seafood and produce. Produce happen to be the first. So these companies they're working with the GS1 Food Service Initiative, the GS1 U.S. Food Service Initiative, and as part of that, they've requested that their suppliers of seafood, poultry, meat, and produce be compliant with their traceability initiatives. So we're starting to see some momentum build on not just on the retail side, but on the food service side as well, which is music to my ears. The label that I referred to earlier, which is the RPC label, returnable plastic container, this was developed, and we used the produce traceability as a way to help the industry because the three largest users of RPCs, Safeway, Kroger, and Loblaw, all had a requirement of a very odd wraparound label. Prior to us coming up with this label, their requirement was for a 2-inch by 10.5-inch label that wrapped around two sides of the RPC, which was very expensive and caused a lot of challenges on automated packing lines to be able to put a label and wrap it around two sides of the RPC. I got the three retailers, Kroger, Safeway, and Loblaw, together on a task force. We challenged the requirement to have the label on two sides. They came back, run actually into their operations and decided that they didn't need that, but they came up with a standard label. It was slightly different than the original PTI label we came up with. The barcode was raised to the top of the label, and that's because some of the plastic containers have little tines that hold the label in, so it wouldn't, the barcode wouldn't interfere with that. And the one thing they added on there was the pack date, and it's in a very unique format, which works for both sides of the border, Canada and the U.S., and doesn't need a lot of training. It's a 3-digit month and 2-digit day. They decided they didn't need the year because if they didn't know what year that produce was from, then they shouldn't be in the produce business. And it is not incorporated in the barcode, and it is purely for the retailers to rotate the product out of the back room to the selling floor in the right sequence. And after the three retailers, Safeway, Kroger, and Loblaw, came up with this, Walmart had always said whatever they come up with, they'll agree to, which they did, and they came out with that specific label as their requirement. As well, it's preferred by Whole Foods, and they're really seeing the industry standardize on this label. This was the original carton label we came up with. This still works on cardboard, except for Walmart. But you know, if I was implementing, I would just put in the RPC label, and that will work for everybody everywhere. It is the one label that everybody likes and no one's ever refused. The retailers really do prefer the pack date. It's a clear, legible format from the RPC label, and again, so they can rotate the product out to the selling floor in the right sequence. In 2015, our focus is on buyer implementation. We've done a very good job. The industry's done a very good job on implementing at the supplier level, and now the focus is going to be on the buyer. Having worked in the buyer operation at the retailer for a number of years, it is no small task for them to get their systems aligned and processes changed in order to incorporate and house the traceability data. There are some supply chain portals, these companies that provide an intermediary service for electronic commerce between suppliers and buyers. They are now looking at providing milestone 6 compliance for retailers. A number of them require the suppliers to send an advanced ship notice to their portal for a shipment to the buyers that use their service. They're now able to provide visibility to that data to the buyers with no implementation or system implementation from the buy side. So we're anticipating this to be taking off early this year. And then the last thing we're doing, we're going to be updating the label best practice to reflect that RPC label, and we're going to be completing the work on our best practice of sharing the traceback data, the one the FDA is working with us on. So we've got most of the work is done on it as far as developing the best practice documents. Now the focus is on implementation, and the retailers are really starting to pay attention to it, and you know, especially since with that cantaloupe outbreak in 2011 that Todd referred to earlier, was the first time a retailer got sued for foodborne illness in produce. And that really has a lot of the retailers' attention right now, and that retailer who was involved paid a very hefty settlement because they happened to sell some of the tainted product. And so that's really got onto the boardroom agendas, if you will, of a lot of major retailers. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Wayne.
Hey, thank you, Ed. Great update, by the way. So we've all heard a lot about traceability now. How do we get ready? Like implementing a food traceability into your facility involves, and I can't stress this enough, total cross-functional and corporate buy-in. This cannot be a small, isolated project spearheaded by one group or even a single individual within the organization. Traceability is a company-wide project and should be treated as such to basically ensure its success. I've found in some cases that management will impose a traceability system like this on the company, but if the plant or the warehouse employees don't see the value or buy into the vision, it will ultimately fail. Each stakeholder or group needs to understand their responsibilities and their part in the overall project, align to its timelines, learn from the training provided, and wholeheartedly use the system as it was intended to be used. So your company has decided to move forward and implement an automated traceability system now. So now what? So what we found is to make it a key element, or let's say tool per se, of your food safety program. That's key first. So just if you've got a food safety program in place, make it a key enabler or a key tool of that food safety program. Make sure you clearly understand your regulatory and, more important, supply chain requirements, recall windows, communications, all sorts of things like that. Map out your process, which I'll show you in a second how to do. You'll need a plan and of your key data collection points, what you are collecting with what and where, and then have a recall plan ready and in place. And then the last piece is really just act, or as I like to call it, execute. Get the project, bake it in, and bake it into your corporate DNA. So like I mentioned on the previous slide, I strongly suggest mapping each unique process using a really simple process flow diagram. I'm going to use a boxed meat example here. But first, think about the major activities taking place in your operation. List each of these distinct parts of the business in separate boxes. I find a flowchart format seems to work best for this. Number each activity to help identify and reference each of your traceability protocol. We'll talk about the traceability protocol next on the next slide. But within a single activity, there may be different types of inputs and outputs being used and produced, and therefore many may be different types of information being collected. It may be necessary to identify and separate these different types of inputs and outputs for the purpose of clear protocol writing. For example, receiving and storing inputs include all the products, consumables, and materials needed to complete the activities that take place within your operation. Now, even though these inputs are all received into the same operation, different employees may manage each input, and the information may be captured and kept differently. It's a management decision on whether more than one written procedure is necessary for each type of activity, but it's highly recommended. And then next, you want to simply list all of your inputs and outputs. List all of the inputs and outputs that will be used by simply adding them to the process diagram we identified earlier. Inputs are all of the required products, consumables, and materials that will be needed to complete each activity. Outputs are the work in progress or finished products and byproducts produced by the activity. And true traceability occurs when you can track the output from one activity to the input of the next. And like I alluded earlier, you're going to need to prepare a traceability protocol. What is that? Well, a traceability protocol is basically a series of procedures describing how your traceability system will operate. You will use the traceability protocol to train your employees on their roles and responsibilities with respect to your facility level and traceability system. It eventually becomes a set of documents that will change and require updates as your business changes, just like any other procedure in your operation. For each of the activities described in your process flow diagram, the one we just talked about on the prior slide, include the following as part of your protocol. Identify the activity area by name. Step 2 is briefly describe the activity that takes place in that area. So for example, if the activity area is packaging, describe the activity that takes place in that area. For example, in this scenario, boxed meat packaging. Identify who is responsible for the activity and for capturing and entering the traceability information. So that could be, if you're a small plant, it could always be a guy named Steve, or in a larger plant, it could be a packaging manager or someone like that. Describe the steps taken in each activity to capture the traceability information and where the information is kept. And the last step is just identify all the pieces of data captured of each procedural step. And then, the most important thing is once you've done all of your mapping, have all your traceability protocols ironed out, you'll need an action plan. Having a well-understood recall action plan streamlines the process of removing any unsafe product from the market. A plan not only lists the processes and their order, but also who is responsible in your plant for what action. A very typical high-level plan may follow the following steps here. So the first one is, of course, assemble your recall team, and then notify any regulatory bodies, identify all the products to be recalled, and then detain and segregate all products to be recalled that are in your control. Prepare any external communications such as press releases if they're needed in your particular case. Prepare the distribution list for your external communications. So this could be press releases, communications to your supply chain vendors, and so on. And then prepare and distribute the notice of recall. Quarantine the recalled products. Decide what to do with the recalled product. Fix the cause of the recall if the problem occurred. And then the last step, which is the most important piece, is actually verify the effectiveness of the recall and is everything accounted for. These steps should aid in minimizing the potential impact of any unsafe food item in the public, anywhere in your supply chain partners, and your own company. And I strongly suggest you try it through a mock recall of your own doing. I suggest at least doing a couple of recalls of your own. The results could be fascinating and may lead you to some interesting conclusions. For example, if your recall process is paper-based, it may not be fast enough for your regulators, or more importantly, your supply chain partners. And like we heard earlier, if your goal is to sell to someone like Costco, you may be able to stay within their 2-hour window, and that's going to be very important for you to do future business with them. And like anything, when we're always talking about traceability, you heard Adam talk a bit about this earlier, and I mentioned some points earlier as well, I'd like to reiterate that traceability software is almost like buying an insurance plan for your business, and it's a way to also protect your brand reputation, as we talked about earlier. In many cases, the initial cost of a traceability solution is quite often recouped within the first recall. This is something that most people won't experience until they have their first recall, and they're like, oh, geez, actually the traceability solution would have been a great option to have here, and it didn't cost that much money. This basically gets recouped through improved reaction times and minimize the potential financial impact of the recall. Personally, being a supplier of traceability solutions, we quite often get brought in after the impact of a recall has already taken its toll on a company, and only after feeling the sting of the recall are they seeking solutions to minimize the impact of future ones. Again, it sounds very similar to like insurance. So when there are companies who have the foresight to automate and implement traceability software long before their first recall, I want to tell you about one such company I've had the pleasure of working with. They're an Ontario-based sausage manufacturer. Historically, it never had a recall. And roughly 5 years ago, they actually came to us to replace their manual solution with basically an automated traceability solution. And it was just, again, it was just for the requirements that they wanted to meet the requirements of a couple of supply chain partners and more so regulatory bodies. This past summer, the first time ever, they had a product test positive for Listeria. The good news is that they had a recall plan in place, like we just saw. They had traceability software to give them immediate access to the information they needed. And then using the reporting capability inside the Carlisle Symphony, which is our traceability software package, within minutes they had identified out of the infected product what production run was infected and what basically production run it was isolated to, how much of the product had been produced in that production run, what was still in inventory, what had been picked but not shipped, and then what had been shipped to who and their contact information. All that was generated for them. The result was actually a huge savings of time, money, and also their reputation. The recall was completed. This includes all the paperwork and the phone calls within 45 minutes. The majority of that time, they told me, was spent on their phone, not doing the trace back, which is great because the reports were generated almost instantly. The quick reaction time resulted in a rapid containment. No food got consumed, therefore no one got sick. This resulted in a lot of positive feedback, not only from their supply chain partners, but also from the regulatory bodies that they actually had to contact regarding the recall. The production report was enabled that it enabled them to isolate the incidents of the very first production run of the day, which apparently underwent an immediate sanitation before proceeding on with it. The next product apparently contained an allergen or something, so that's why it was the first production run of the day. This information enabled them to minimize their loss to that specific production run and not the entire day's worth of production. So this saved them tens of thousands of dollars. And then the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, praised both their readiness and their systems for such a well-executed recall. But overall, what they had basically done is they had the foresight to actually have an action plan and have implemented a traceability solution that really enabled them to dramatically reduce their reaction and containment times, minimize any losses, and then preserve their reputation with their supply chain partners. Ironically, I wanted to tie this together, but this is also the same company I mentioned earlier that actually had grown their company significantly on the back of their traceability system. So when doing so, when you're actually now, you've heard a lot about how to prepare and how to get ready. Part of your kind of to-do list, as well as if you do choose to look at an automation path, is choose the right traceability partner. It's going to be critical to your success and potentially the future profitability of your company. Choosing the right traceability solution that's right for you is actually, I can't stress this enough, it's an extremely personal journey. I haven't been into any two food plants that do the process the exact same way. So there is customizations and things like that, but if it's done right and implemented properly by the right solution partner, utilizing the appropriate technologies and best practices, I always say it's fair to say that traceability should not be an added cost, but an enabler to your company's long-term success. So since traceability is so unique by industry, each industry has its own unique requirements and needs. That's why we partnered with Redline for their experience and track record in the produce industry. They've been doing this since 1977. Well, Carlisle's been doing this for just over 30 years. We were actually just celebrating our 30th year this year. And no one can replace the experience and support you get from being a part of the leading industry associations on food, such as the Produce Traceability Initiative, the PTI initiative that Redline's involved with, and associations like NAMI, the New North American Meat Institute, that recently formed from the combination of NAMA and AMI last year. And then also the last bullet here kind of reminds me of a plant we were invited to see this past fall. It was a large poultry processor. We were invited there to see about replacing their existing plant floor production and productivity system. They were currently using an accounting-centric solution, which claimed it would gather production data from the plant floor. Given its limited data collection capabilities and unreliable architecture, they had experienced some very costly production interruptions. I remember as senior manager there blurting this out in the meeting. It's probably one of the best quotes I ever heard. He said, "I will never again trust my production to an accounting package," which kind of brings me back to this last bullet. Neither Redline or Carlisle is an accounting company trying to change your business processes to work within the guidelines of their accounting practices, nor are we just a pure software house that hasn't really spent any time on the plant or packaging floor. Redlines and Carlisle basically are experts in their particular nuances of our respective markets, and we simply know your business. And to tell you a bit more about Redline, I'm going to pass you back over to Todd to tell you more about what Redline and their experience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Wayne. So real briefly here, I know we've got some questions that are queued up. I'd just like to give you a little background on Redline. I actually started the company back in 1997, and we're headquartered out of California. We're the leader in inventory and PTI solutions and have over 150 customer sites, and that's growing every month. We estimate we're handling well over 400 million cartons per year, and really what kind of makes us unique is that we are a one-stop shop. Similar to Carlisle, we actually provide not only the software, but also the hardware, the integration, the on-site installation, the training, the support, any consulting services you need. We even manage our customers' hardware service maintenance, contracts, and warranty, in addition to supplying the PTI labels and the pallet tags. Just real briefly looking at Redline's whole chain traceability suite, we really handle everything from harvest to shipment. We enable the PTI case labeling and the pallet labeling and tracking. They're easy to use, barcode-driven, and standards-based systems. We use mobile scanners which communicate within the facility using Wi-Fi, or in the case of our field product, if we're out in a field somewhere, we will use the cellular data connection. We provide a complete audit log which includes the date, the time, the operator, and the task, and then also manage that internal traceability, and we'll publish to those external systems, be they accounting systems or third-party portals, etc. We have an open architecture which allows us to do integration with accounting systems, and we're currently integrated with 2 different accounting systems and working on a 3rd. And lastly, our investment protection means that if you invest in one of our software products, that investment moves forward if you want to use one of our other software products. And now, Wayne, back over to you to talk a little bit about Carlisle.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, actually, the parallels between the 2 companies are very, very similar. Very much like Redline, Carlisle's a fully integrated technology solutions provider. We basically, our goal is to streamline and automate the data collection process across the entire food production cycle. Our emphasis is on product traceability and recall management in the meat industry. Again, we grew up on the plant floor. Again, so you heard earlier, we're not an accounting package. We have the best practices and the processes in place to kind of make an easy integration into your plant without a lot of plant employee retraining and things like that. So typically, that point I talked about earlier about buy-in and corporate cross-functional buy-in in the operation, we definitely aid to the simplicity of the adoption. we've got a highly available architecture, which means even if you have network issues or your server goes down, guess what? Actually, you're still in production. Our FAT client workstations will keep your production floor going, even though you may have network architecture issues. So that's, for us, we're always production first and everything else later. Our simplicity and affordability. Basically, we've got very intuitive data collection interfaces, very much like Redline. We work on little mobile computers, ruggedized workstations, PCs, tablets, you name it. And a lot of times we get mated with an ERP system if you're a larger company, using something like SAP or Oracle, because we actually do a lot more detailed data collection on the plant floor than a lot of those systems can traditionally do, but we're also far less to deploy on the plant floor than extending your SAP or your Oracle or any sort of ERP system down to the plant floor. And then just lastly, who uses us? There's just a few logos there some of you may be familiar with, but we've got a healthy mix of really small family-owned businesses right up to North America's largest food processors and producers. So the great news is that if you haven't already, please download our Dummies books on traceability. They are free to all attendees on this webinar. Food Traceability for Dummies is more specifically for meat processors, and you can get that by going to the Carlisle website there. Produce Traceability, which is from Redline, is obviously for produce companies. Simply go to the Redline URL to get a free copy of that. And then at this point, I'd like to turn this back over to our moderator, Maureen, as she's got another question for you.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Wondering if you could just answer one more quick question for us. We're interested in knowing if you're interested in a deeper dive, an additional webinar on the traceability for the produce or protein industries. So if you could just answer real quick, that would be great. And I see answers coming in, and wow, 95% yes. So that's great. Let me give it just a couple more minutes, couple more seconds here. Okay, great. Great. So it looks like you guys are interested, and we're going to tell you at the end how you can sign up for the next webinar on traceability. So thanks for your responses. Over to you, Todd.
Great. Well, at this point, we've reached the end of the content for today, and now's the important part, which is to answer the questions of our attendees. So if you haven't already put a question in, look at your little window there, and you'll see where it says questions at the bottom where you see this red circle. If you put your questions in, we'll go ahead and direct them to the appropriate speaker and get them answered for you. So Maureen, do we have any questions?
We do. We have a number of questions that have come in. I'll just dive right in. So first question is for you, Todd, at Redline. Does Redline sell labels, and can these labels be pre-printed in the office instead of the field?
Yes, they can. We do sell the labels, and the nature of our systems, our field systems specifically, will allow you to pre-print them in the office and send them out to the field. Or if you've got the nature of your business is more contract buy, where things could be changing frequently during the day, we'll also allow you to print those labels directly in the field. Okay,
great. Next question just came in. How should you track your labels?
How should you track your labels? As far as tracking the labels go, basically there's two aspects of that. One of them is managing your inventory of your labels so that you don't run out, and we will assist you with that by moderating your usage and then suggesting to you when it might be time to buy again. But probably the user's asking about how do you track the labels once they've been printed. And once they've been printed, basically what you're going to be doing is using a barcode scanner to read the data off of there to bring it into your system so that you have that retained for future use.
All right, great. Next question is one step back and one step forward traceability good enough, or does it need to go further?
You know what, I'll take the first shot, and if anyone else would like to join in, please do. You know, one step forward and one step back really, to me, represents the scope of your operations. By itself, it is not good enough, but if everybody in the supply chain is managing where their sources came from and where their product went to, and the next step does the same and the next step does the same, then we collectively do have a complete whole chain traceability, which is really what the PTI and traceability is all about.
Yeah, I agree, Todd. It's almost like it follows the three pillars we were talking about earlier. You know, when you really think about that, you know, when we were talking about the production. So every input is an output, and an output is an input in a sense. Yeah, and as long as you've got yourself covered one step up, one step down, and everyone else in your supply chain is doing that, in theory, that's kind of looked after. That is traceability.
Okay, great. Next question is, will manual paper-based traceability processes still be acceptable? And if so, for how long?
You know what, this is Todd again, and I'll take a shot at that. And Adam, if you want to chime in on this one as well, feel free. I don't think that the FDA has ever said anything. In fact, as Ed was alluding to, they're not going to be prescriptive to say you must use RFID technology or you must use barcode technology. That's a little bit beyond the scope for the government. What they are going to say is you must be able to do this, and you must be able to do this within a specified time window. So I think that the real question for people to look at is my paper-based system sufficient based on my volume? If you're a low-volume operator, it may be something that you can work with indefinitely. However, as the business grows and you're looking at multiple lots per day and hundreds becoming thousands, becoming hundreds of thousands of cartons, it quickly becomes unmanageable to scale.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. I think Adam alluded to it earlier. I think you may find the market, the retailers predominantly will probably drive that. If there is an evolution to automation that's mandated, I think you'll probably find that the retailers and the market itself will drive that.
I would support that as well, Adam, here. The proposed traceability regulations for the Safe Foods for Canadians Act does still say if in paper form, it certainly must be legible without external aids. But certainly I would say the cost in being able to, sheer administrative cost, being able to execute a recall, for example, or to meet a retailer's requirements, we're only going to see increase. So certainly it seems like I would agree in Canada the government is not yet in a position that they'd like to prescribe, but it's kind of like filing your taxes. You can still do it by paper, but we see a lot of people going to online, and it gets more and more difficult to do it on the paper side.
And I think a lot of it of that to do, to this question is, I've been told by some kind of small to medium-sized meat processors that when in Canada every so often there is a mock recall that they need to respond to, and sometimes because of their paper-based system wasn't that efficient, they actually ended up having to shut the plant down for part of the day or the day to complete the mock recall, and that actually has a pretty hefty cost associated with it too. Where if they could have just ran the 4 or 5 reports they needed to do and make the calls and provide that information back, within the minutes or the hours that it would have taken them to do it with an automated system, that alone is actually, I think, justification in enough cases.
Ed, did you have a comment you wanted to add to this one?
Yeah, I'm expecting the record keeper regulation from FDA to include a piece that if in the event that you're required to provide traceback data, it be in electronic format. Because talking to Sherry McGarry, who headed up the traceback investigations for years, one of the things that really frustrated her was it was a manual-based and paper-based, and we are anticipating, and I think that's why she's participating on the work group we're on, that when you have to submit data, that will have to be in electronic format. So if you want to capture it manually, if you get a tap on the shoulder, you're going to have to somehow get that into a spreadsheet or key directly into their web portal or whatever process they come up with.
All right,
Thank
great. Thank you. Next question. This person is wondering if the products we talked about are compatible with famous software.
Software, are they talking like accounting packages or? Because I can take that. I think Todd and I have a very similar answer. Is because the technologies in which most of today's traceability systems on, or at least I can speak for the Carlisle and Redline systems. As long as it's a popular accounting package or ERP system, really integration is possible. Like Todd mentioned, I think they've got 3 standard integrations or so right out of the gate. Same with us. We pretty much, if you're running something as small as QuickBooks or Sage or right up to SAP, Oracle, we pretty much have integrations built for that. We actually have an integration tool that enables us to integrate with most popular accounting or ERP systems. So as long as you're running something that we've probably heard of in the industry is accepted, there's normally not a problem integrating.
Thanks, Wayne. And Famous is one that I'm familiar with because it is specific to produce. And yes, we do have Famous integration within the Redline solutions.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, great. This next question has to do with direct store delivery, DSD. And this person's wondering, can you trace direct store delivery for products that you reship to stores daily in small batches? And should the shipper scan all the products? And they're concerned that that's a little labor intensive, but.
So this, Todd, I'll take the first shot at that one. You know, really the requirement is no different if I'm shipping to a distribution center or doing a direct store delivery. What I need to be able to do is identify what is the product I'm delivering and if there is one or multiple traceability lot numbers that I need to track to have that associated with it. So it really doesn't matter if I'm delivering 2 pallets or 2 cartons, as long as I know what the product is and what the lot number is in case there's a recall and who I delivered it to. I've got the front end of it taken care of, and on the back end I'm using my Redline software, my Carlisle software to actually keep track of all those sources and inputs.
All right, great. This next question I think might be for you, Ed. If I comply with PTI labeling, will this satisfy the yet-to-be-released FSMA recording keeping requirements?
And the answer is yes. And although the record-keeping regulations have not come out yet, all the conversations and interaction we've had with the FDA, this will over and above satisfy their requirements that we're expecting in the regulation.
All right, great, thanks. And this next question is, can a processor or produce supplier really profit from investing in traceability, and how?
Oh, sure. Well, there's I'll take the beginning of this. Obviously, we'd like to tout the book. There's a nice chapter in the Food Traceability Dummies for book that talks about that. But so go download the book. But secondly, yeah, there is, and I think a lot of it came from what I briefly alluded to in the presentation. Is with first off, there'll be 2 sets of things that'll add to your profits. Is the first off, obviously the obvious savings from any recall if it impacts you. But second of all, basically traceability solutions are really plant floor solutions that collect a lot of data and then produce reports. Those reports can be anything from like traceability reports like we've talked to, right down to sales reports, production reports, productivity reports, and things like that. So depending on how crazy you want to get with your data analysis, like I was alluding to earlier, you could start doing some really interesting things if you work for a company that has multiple production lines. Let's just say the scenario is you've got 3 production lines that are working over 2 shifts that are producing the same product. If all the production lines are working at the same speed and building the same product, you could start saying, well, how come one production line is completing their production of, let's just say, 1,200 cartons a day faster, or why are they having less rejections or things like that? You can start actually looking at that and start trending some of the answers, and it may be the employees. I know one particular company we worked with, they actually noted that one of their production lines had a larger number of smokers on the production lines that were taking ad hoc breaks, which was slowing down production. Little things like that they were able to take action on the data and basically make little changes to basically streamline production. Even sometimes there's just been people that aren't as productive, or they've detected language issues or sometimes physical capability issues of people on the lines that the lines are just running slower or not as efficient. And you just really can, just from massaging the data, look at these trends, dig down into what's going on, and then make some very interesting decisions, some very proactive decisions that will help your business moving forward.
Yeah, Adam Meyer here. Speaking to the value of case studies and examples to help find find stories and anecdotes that speak to the subsector of the food industry that you work in and the size of operations that you have. Really encourage you to look at the case studies that have been provided today by these folks on the call, and also check out our website, ontario.ca/traceability. We've got just a myriad of case studies to see how traceability has impacted a range of businesses, size across various subsectors of the food industry.
Very good. And this is Todd. The thing I'd add to that is, the obvious is if there's a recall and the cost of that recall is higher than the cost of your investment, that's an immediate payback. But beyond that, I'm hoping you don't have a recall. What I'm really looking at there is what is the value to your brand and to your sales. We've had a number of customers who the PTI has been going on for a while who got on board early on in 2009, 2010, and when I go back and ask them and say, hey, you're still doing this and you're doing it at full production, why are you doing that? They're saying, number one is if there's ever a problem, I know I've got it dialed in, but number two, my salespeople are actually getting more business every year because as we go out to talk to potential customers, we tell them what we have in place. We talk about our culture of food safety, and we talk about our traceability system. And that is something that really helps solidify your brand to the retailer as well as to the consumer. So I would say that beyond the obvious, the less obvious is the value to your brand. And then the second thing, as Wayne was alluding to, is you get a wealth of information when you start collecting traceability data that can help you look at your business to say, where are the rough spots that I can smooth out? Where are the parts that I'm hitting friction that I can actually improve my operations, and in doing so, improve my profitability? Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. That's it for questions right now. And I just want to remind folks that you will be getting a link to the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email after the webinar ends. So back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Maureen. So first of all, we'd like to thank everybody for attending today, and also let you know the next series that we have in this part 2 of the new era of traceability from compliance to profits will be held on February 25th. And what we'll be doing on this one is we will be recording these. Carlisle will be doing theirs specifically focused to meat processors. Redlines will be really looking at the new produce traceability model, and both of these will also be recorded. So if you found today's very interesting and you wanted to see both of them, you're going to have to make a choice on the 25th, but you would also have an opportunity to listen to a recorded copy of the other webinar if you're not able to attend. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody, and if you are interested in getting a copy of this presentation, do let us know. Send us an email, and we will follow up with you and send you a PDF of today's presentation. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone once again for attending. I'd like to thank our panel of speakers for their time and their expertise that they've shared with us today, and wish you all a good day.
Thank you.